What's good? I'm Eli, and today, instead of a film study, what I'm going to do is present the concept of range in boxing, in the sport of boxing, where you can strike with your hands using punches. Range plays an important role, plays a role in maybe all combat sports. But today, I'm going to talk about range in boxing, and I'm going to use some graphics to help me illustrate what I'm talking about. Give me a second to share my screen here. And let me make sure that this is clearly visible. Cool. So, in the sport of boxing, when the round begins, bell rings, the fighters start at opposite corners. To engage with each other, they have to approach each other towards the center of the ring. There's a lot of different factors about this first initial engagement, like how fast they approach the center of the ring. Do they decide to do a little fist bump, friendly gesture, before they begin to try to hurt each other? So, speed to getting to the center of the ring, but also how promptly to begin the fighting are two very important factors. But before any offense or defense can begin, what's going to have to happen is they're going to have to position themselves. One of the first things you learn in boxing is your fighting stance. So, being in your fighting stance means you are most ready to punch, to defend punches. But there are different distances of range. At certain distances, they will not be able to hit each other. And at close distances, they will be limited on how they can hit each other. Let's dive in. When I'm talking about a distant range, is my vocabulary using the term distant. I'm going to call it a distant range. They're too distant for anybody to be able to make contact. Even if they both step forward, they wouldn't be able to make contact. They're too far apart. From the start of the round, they're at opposite corners in the ring. They are at a distant range, but they can begin stepping forward towards each other and still be at a distant range. Right? So let's imagine that you take a snapshot. They're this far apart. You see my stick figures. I've got one guy who's here on the left approaching, the opponents on the right also approaching. And so when you take a snapshot of where they are at this very moment, they have their arms stretched out to show reach. Reach is also a very important factor to consider when you're thinking about positioning. So you get in your fighting stance, and in this situation, they have the same reach, but that's not always the case. So you think of what is the reach of each person. Let's take it from the perspective of this guy on the left. You're this guy on the left, and at this moment, if you try to jab step, you're going to use your full reach. This is your longest punch. But your jab step, when this foot comes forward here, that jab step's only going to reach as far as this line. That's not going to be able to hit him. Even if he were to step at that same time, his foot takes him out further, meaning that his punch can reach as far as this line. No one's going to hit each other. There's way too much space in between. Now, what if they get a little bit closer to each other? right? So from this distance, they continue to approach. They're both taking that step forward. Obviously, the stick figures don't look like they're in a fighting stance, but for the purposes of this presentation, I'd like to just pay attention to their reach and range and just pretend like they would be in a fighting stance in an instant. You see, this is the same situation. Although they have gotten closer, no one's going to make contact, even if they were both to step forward. Again, virtually at the same time. Right? So I want to help you interpret that. The exact same time is them lifting their foot at the same time and bringing that foot back down to the floor at the same time. That is the exact same time. When I say virtually at the same time, it means within the moment, right? And in a moment can be less than a second of time. It can be a little bit more than a second of time. A little more flexible with the definition when I say a moment. But when I say an instant, I'm speaking about exact time. And in boxing, 1 second is a big amount of time. It's a big unit there. So let's say in the same moment, they both step forward, whether it be at the exact same instant or one kind of steps forward. So let's say you're this guy on the left, you decide to take a step forward because you're thinking of getting ready for a jab step, or you're thinking of just holding that stick out, keep a barrier in front of you, right? So at this far, it might be easy to tell nothing's going to happen. You can be super confident that there's no danger to you, and you can also refrain from overreaching because you know nothing's going to happen. Most people can easily read this. You get a little closer, now it's like, oh, snaps, right? We're taking a snapshot. So this is called a static view. It doesn't capture factors of motion. When you say static view, it doesn't capture what's going on with motion. So earlier I said some of the most important factors at the beginning of the round is how quick they approach each other. These static views are not going to capture how quick they're approaching each other. So we don't know the speeds. But when you start to get to this distance, sometimes it can be confusing. For example, let's say you're this guy and you choose a moderate speed. You're approaching the center of the ring at a moderate speed, but your opponent's coming in fast. Might be hard to tell what your range distance is here. But at this distance, when you look at this static view, it is still too distant to make any contact, even if they were both to take a step forward in the same moment. So let's take this static view at this distance. You're here on the left, and you decide to take a step forward and pop that jab out. It's going to reach up to this line. If he decides to step forward, his jab is going to reach this far. So your gloves are going to be too far from each other to even touch. Now, it's important. Why is it important to notice the difference here, right? Because I can simply just explain, hey, you're too far, no contact's going to happen, even if both step forward. The difference is the factor of motion. When you're this far, it's easy to tell that you're still too distant. When you're this far and you guys are moving fast towards each other, sometimes it's harder to tell. But if you get good at reading this in real time, then you're going to be able to know this is still too distant. So you can be in your fighting stance, but you know that even if you were both to have the exact same timing on the jab step, no one's going to make any type of contact, not even hand fighting. But you continue to approach further closer, right? So you say, this is the first frame, here's the second frame, and here's the third frame. And we're not capturing the speed at which you're closing this distance. but that's something that you would have to work on with your timing. You say you approach each other slower, you would still have to be able to read these distances to understand you're still too distant, or hey, now we're in range to start fighting. So let's say you get even closer. And what I've done here is to color the lines because it's going to get a little more tricky after this frame. Let's follow the colors. This blue line is where your opponent's punch can reach to if he jab steps. The red line will be where your punch can reach to if you jab step. What I've done here in this frame is to demonstrate that this is the closest that you can get to each other at a distant range before any contact is made. After this, some hand fighting is going to begin, at the least. At the least. But from here, even if you were to jab step, you're this guy here in black. If you were to jab step, your glove's only going to reach this far. And in that moment, he jab steps as well. His glove's only going to reach that far. They're not going to touch. Right? So when you think about people starting off the round by fist bumping and doing a friendly gesture, they have to travel through these distances and they have to pass this distance here. They have to close in the distance past this point. At this exact distance, there is still no contact, even when both step forward. I'm going to make a comment here to remind you that here in this example, they have the exact same reach. This is the exact same body dimensions between the two stick figures. In real life, it's not always that case. And half an inch can make a difference, right? But sometimes you have fights that are set up with a difference in reach between the two fighters that is more than 1 inch, more than 2 inches, more than 3 inches. That's a big difference. And so the bigger difference in reach that you see, the more important that factor plays a role in the whole scheme of fighting. But right now we're talking about range. And so to get the concept across from my brain to yours, I'm using an example where they have the exact same reach. Okay. Keep that in mind. Now we're going to get to the place where they start hand fighting. They're still at a distant reach because they cannot land any punches on each other. But what's important to point out in the difference here is that right here you'll see the blue line where your opponents can reach up to is still to the right of the red line where your punch can reach to. It means that this glove will come forward and only reach that far, and that his glove will come forward, only reach that far, still leaving some space between. Even if they were to tap, maybe bring it in a little bit closer. That's what we're saying the difference is here, because now the red line is past his blue line, meaning that in this moment you decide to jab step, your foot's going to come forward, allowing you to extend that reach further forward, where your glove will reach all the way to this red line. If he jab steps too in that moment, his glove's going to reach to the blue line here. So there's only going to be hand-to-hand contact when they both step forward. Still nobody can land. So all in all, the lesson that I'm trying to deliver here is that when you're at a distant range, nobody's going to land. Nobody's going to land. The possibility of landing a punch comes at closer ranges. That's what we're going to talk about. But at this distance, It's only hand-to-hand contact. And the type of hand-to-hand contact here is I mean, not necessarily like it's a different type of hand-to-hand contact than when you get closer. The type of hand fighting or the type of maneuvers that you do at this distance is going to be different than when you get closer. But I hope that this is becoming clear that before this, there is no contact at all. And then there's a point where you can have hand to hand contact. Fighting at this, trying to, not fighting, but positioning at this distance before the fighting actually happens is trying to engage in the hand fight before the possibility of landing. I'm not going to get into this like a whole nother level of stuff, but I'm trying to show you where the door is, not necessarily open the door completely, but here's the door. You will want to open that, go learn about it. We're going to take it from basic level 1 here. Distance, a distant range means you cannot land. So this also is the same situation where there's only going to be hand-to-hand contact. Still nobody's going to land. They're too distant. If both were to step forward, you'll see that your foot comes forward, allows your reach to reach all the way to the red line. If he were to jab step at that same time, his glove can reach as far as this. The type of hand fighting that happens between this, because this can allow a fist bump, but not really strong hand-to-hand fighting. At this distance, now this is some more serious hand fighting. So you can make hand-to-hand contact, but still nobody's going to land. What an interesting place to be. What can you do with that? In today's presentation, I'm not going to lead to implementation, like talking about what you can do, but I mean, just think about it. This is the last moment when you could play it safe. So you may want to do a fist bump, but if y'all continue to approach each other, whether you're moving forward, they're moving forward, or you're both moving forward, right? You're getting into the point where now the fighting begins, and it can begin with hand fighting. It's possible that because of the way we can't capture motion here, right, on these static views, but the way that they're approaching each other, the speed and everything is like might make it so that this is skipped. Let's say you do a fist bump with your opponent, and then maybe they decide to come in rushing. They don't stop here for the hand fighting. They want to come and land something. So they're going to close distance fast. There's no time for you to do some hand fighting. He didn't slow down and just stay at there. He came slowed down to fist bump you. So let's say in this first frame, right, you're at the opposite side of the rings and you start approaching each other. Fist bump here, or right between these two, you're fist bumping, but then he doesn't decide to pause here. He's going to close distance, close that in. So let me explain static views as the closing in happens. So it's possible that you don't stop at any of these static views. The motion is too quick. You don't make decisions based on these distances. But there's moments where there is some pausing. Those are the moments that you need to take the upper hand. And reading the distance, understanding what range means for making your next decisions is going to be important for you to take the upper hand when those little pauses happen. Okay, so here we have the hand fighting begins. Hand fighting is serious. And let's study what this means here, right? What's the difference? I have these little shadow guys. It's just to imagine when they do take that step forward, most likely for a jab step, what's happening? What does hand fighting look like, right? So you're here, this guy, you take that jab step forward. Your foot can come as far as you want to take it, as far as you're able to take it. But here you are at a jab step, And let's pretend that you're deciding to follow with the back foot, so you're going to land right here. Let's say in that moment your opponent decides to do the same thing. So when both of you are stepping forward towards each other from this distance, there's only going to be hand fighting. No one's going to land. Let's think about, what if you don't throw a punch, but you step forward and feint the punch, right? So you're pretending like you're going to jab step, and you actually move your body forward in fighting position, but you don't pop the punch out after all. Let's say your opponent steps forward and thinking that you're coming in hard to attack, he's going to throw his hand out. So let's imagine for a second that this arm is not out, it's in a guard. Your opponent's reach is going to reach up to the blue line, still not going to be able to touch you. Gloves here in front, you can make that contact to the glove to glove contact, because you're blocking, you want to catch, you want to parry, however you want to handle that glove coming in. It's going to be right in front of you to touch it, even if you don't extend your arm out, because you brought your body forward. You can have that hand-to-hand contact. Similarly, your opponent might step forward and you're popping a jab out, right? And you guys can make that hand-to-hand contact. All right, so we're understanding the hand fighting happening at a distant range where nobody can land. But once you pass this point, there's a point where you pass and you're close enough. It's possible to land when both of you step forward. I'm going to call that stepping range. That's my vocabulary. If anyone can help me find better vocabulary, I'm definitely open to it. But to me, it makes most sense to call this stepping range for now. The concept is that if you both step forward, somebody can land. Let's imagine you taking a jab step forward, right? Despite whether your arm pops out or not, you should be able to read that you stepping forward to this position allows you to reach as far as this. If your opponent doesn't step, he's still here. But let's say he's stepping in that exact moment. That's what this static view is trying to show. This frame is about both of you stepping forward. So your opponent steps up to this point with the jab step. His reach reaches as far as the blue line. If he wanted to tap that face, he could probably tap that face. Same thing for you, though. So if you both decide to take that step forward, and we're talking about that one step, right? We're not talking about running at each other, but just take it frame by frame. At this distance where they are now, if you were both to step forward, you would see that one of you can land. Right? Talking about offense and defense is separate than talking about positioning. Right now, I'm focused on positioning. But knowing that now you're in a stepping range should help you decide what to focus on with offense and defense. So you can both land, but most likely only the straight punch can land. And if you're going to try to land with a hook or uppercut, you're probably going to be overreaching. So that's a little implication for you to take to your offense and defense. But my main point is that there's a point where you are no longer in a distant range. You have entered a stepping range. Somebody can land. But this is the most distance you can be in a stepping range. You can get closer in a stepping range. Let's say in the example where you're going to close distance, but your opponent's not going to step. Right? So you're taking that jab step forward. It's still impossible for you to land because only you stepped forward. If they decide in that moment not to step forward, you'll see that your reach can get up to this red line. Their reach can get up to the blue line. So you can do some hand fighting, but no one's going to land. It's going to be impossible to land here. Right? It's going to be only hand-to-hand contact when only one steps forward. You see, you land here, they pop their jab out. They're almost going to be able to reach you. You see that blue line almost by the face. You see this red line almost by the face. They're almost going to be able to reach you, but most likely not. Some serious hand fighting can happen here, though. And what comes out of hand fighting? Dominance can come out of hand fighting. So understanding range can help you take dominance because you don't need to put yourself in danger where they can land on you, but you can pose a threat coming into them. They might decide to throw something there offensively, and you might decide to hand fight with that. Right? You see their glove coming out because you're stepping forward. Say, cool, let's hand fight. Right? Maybe you started off distant, and then we start closing space. Right? So maybe you start closing space, and we get to the point where you want to pop a jab out to see what he will do. Maybe he slips. Maybe he pulls back as you pop in the jab out. So he defends your jab step, but then he wants to pop his jab out too in that moment. So it's not exactly the same instant because he's taking the first instant to defend your jab step coming towards him. Even though it wouldn't have landed, you're making him react. So you're already taking the upper hand by controlling what's happening because he's reacting defensively. And he's a good fighter, so he's going to jab right back, try to catch you. But if your feet stop moving here, you don't further approach, you only take that one step, and you're good at reading the range here, you're going to know, okay, he's not going to touch. Remember, this presentation is about an example where the two fighters have the exact same range. Now, what we're going to skip to is the slight little difference in distance making a big difference in the fight. You no longer are at stepping range if you close the distance from here. You get a little bit closer, now there's some landing possible. At the long range, it's possible to land when only one person steps forward. At stepping range, it's impossible to land when only one person steps forward. So you get a little bit closer past stepping range. Now you're in a long range. That's the vocabulary I think is best to use here. Again, I'm open to getting help with clarifying with better defining some terms here, finding the right words for the concepts that we're discussing. But I'm going to use long range to talk about this distance where it is possible to land when only one person steps forward. In this graphic here, you're going to see that you taking that step forward lands your body position here within range for him to jab you without no step. Your opponent takes no step, he can jab you because you've gotten close enough. But with that step, you can also land on him. It's possible because you're close enough now. But what if nobody takes that step forward? So let's say you have stepped forward. So let's say you guys are in this long range here. And in this example, you're stepping forward so that somebody can land. But what if nobody steps forward? At this distance, they're a little bit further, you for sure can read that nobody's going to be able to land unless somebody steps forward, right? You're here, they're there. You're like, no one's going to land from here. I'm going to step forward and try to get something. Or I'm going to step forward and see if he tries to get something, right? But that's you deciding on range. Okay, I'm going to get a little bit closer because if no one steps forward, there's no landing happening. right? So you can get a little bit closer here where nobody steps forward, but the little glove to glove touch happens, right? You can be in the long range and have hand to hand contact without any steps forward, but it'll still be impossible to land, right? It's an example of nobody stepping forward. You reach as far as the red line, your opponent reaches as far as the blue line. You see that there's a little overlap, means gloves can touch. Sometimes what you'll see is from how we're talking about you start at opposite sides of the ring, you're approaching each other. Sometimes what we'll see is people slow down in this stepping range. If they both slow down in the stepping range, they're like making a pause. And this pause in stepping range is like a mutual agreement that they're going to be friendly in the first moment so that they can fist bump from here. So this static view captures the long range where hand-to-hand fighting can begin. What I'm explaining about the beginning of the round is that sometimes they pause in the stepping range before they get to this long range. And then paused in that moment, they make the mutual agreement, right? Because they're trying to see, is it safe to do a fist bump or is he going to pull a fast one on me? So they pause in stepping range, make the mutual agreement to enter this long range solely for doing this, solely for just letting them tap. At full extension, the gloves completely overlap, but typically the fist bump is initiated before full extension. So I put them at this distance to show you that just to really highlight the difference between. You can still be in long range and get a little closer, but if no one takes a step forward, it's not going to be possible to land. Hand to hand contact is going to get serious at this distance, but without any steps forward from this distance, it's going to be impossible to land still. You don't take a step, your opponent doesn't take a step, he reaches as far as this, it's not close enough to you. Your reach can get to here, it's not close enough. But you can be in long range and take a step forward and land. So this is the same exact distance, but now we're saying you take a step forward. In that moment, you're like, I'm a jab step him. All right, it's game time. I'll reach him with my jab step. So you take that jab step. Your body position is here, allowing your reach to extend to this red line. Look at that. You're going to be able to hit him for sure. Not barely hit him. You're going to be able to hit him good. Maybe not even full reach, right? At this distance, you'll see that it's long range, but you're going to land before the full reach on your straight punch. When only one person is stepping forward, in this example, you are, not your opponent. But if you didn't take that step, it would be impossible to land. We prove that because this is the same exact distance, but nobody steps forward. See that? So the original positions of these stick figures doesn't change from frame to frame. The difference is that in here, no one's stepping forward, and in this frame, you're stepping forward. Now, if he defends your jab step, you are in range for him to land on you. Because you brought yourself forward to take your jab step, you are now in range for him to land on you. So you better be prepared to defend, because whether or not your jab lands, he may already be deciding as he saw your foot coming forward, as he saw your body getting closer, he's like, pop the jab out. And what the worst thing to run into is somebody who's good at defending your jab, but is so quick to pop that jab out that he hits you before you can bring this hand back. He hits you in the opening. You might have the other hand ready. So if you're good enough, you can use the other hand to defend. But if he's good enough, he's gonna wait for that glove to come out and he's gonna punch on that side, making it harder for you to defend it. But that's a whole another combo, right? That's about how you handle offense and defense. We're talking about positioning, so more specifically, reading, understanding, range. So let's change the example to where they're going to be in the same distance. You see the stick figures, the solid stick figures are not getting any closer. The difference is that instead of you taking the jab step, you paused to read, and your opponent wanted to jump the gun on you, and he jab steps. Same thing. When you read the top here, the notes I wrote is the same. You land before full reach when only one steps forward, but it's impossible to land without a step. Same exact notes. But let's say you don't decide to take a step, you're reading, your opponent decides to jab step, he can land, better defend that. But you can land because he's brought his body forward. So if you're deciding that I'm not going to rush the jab step, I'm going to time him as he's coming in. You're going to look for that jab step as it's coming, defend it, defend the glove, pop your jab out without even stepping towards him, and you can connect. You might land before you make full reach on that straight punch. And so that should be a factor in you deciding how you're going to strike. I feel like I have to give you one little quick note on that. If you know that this range is going to allow you or your opponent to land, if someone takes a step forward, then you should be prepared for this scenario where you don't step, they step. And if you're going to land the jab without stepping, you got to have a little extra physicality to it. Your knees got to be bent a little more so that you can control your weight. Without talking about technique on a jab, I should be able to explain and you understand that you're going to land before a full reach. Your arm's not going to be fully extended. The power's got to express a little earlier than you would if you're expecting to land at full reach. What does that mean? It means that maybe you're understanding how to control your weight so that you put some power behind it without tensing up the arm too much. You're putting some power behind it, and the arm is tensing a little bit earlier to capture the power in your glove, expressing that when you land before full reach on that straight punch. Hope that makes some sense. Then you get closer and you're in mid-range. So here the stick figures are this far apart. It's as close as you can get and still be in long range. And then you get to mid-range. A little bit closer than this, now you're in mid-range. What does that mean? That hand-to-hand contact is possible, and it's possible to land at full reach without any steps forward. So at this distance, they are both able to land without any steps forward, but it would have to be at full reach. So this is the start of mid-range. Hand fighting happens a lot of times in this range because they're coming in from a longer range typically, and they're pausing in this moment, and they'll both throw the jab. The pause just means that they step and their feet have landed, they're in position, and then they decide, boom, pop out that jab. They can both land, but it's got to be at full reach on that straight punch. You can get a little closer and still be in mid-range, and now you're landing the straight punch before full reach, before your arm is extended completely. No one's taking step forward. But what about the example where somebody does take a step forward? Let's say you're the one who's going to take that step forward. So the distance hasn't changed between them. So the range is the same exact. It's mid range, but the idea is that from here you decide you're going to step in on him. Typically, that's because you're trying to go from a mid range to a short range. You're trying to be all up in the pocket. What does that mean, though? It's difficult to land straight punches when you're closing like that. So a lot of times we'll see the moment you pause right here, pop that jab out, you can land before full reach, right? Maybe this is where it starts. Maybe during the fight, you guys are back out to a distant range. Sometimes it happens in the fight where you're back out to this type of distant range where no one can touch, and then pressure fighter, maybe both of you, maybe one of you, is going to want to close that up. And, maybe it's close it up quick. I'm trying to get in the pocket. When you sense that attitude, and maybe that's your own attitude, but you sense the attitude from yourself or your opponent that there's pressure fighting trying to come in. You have to understand you're getting to this mid range real quick. You're going to pop a jabs that you can land. Are you going to pop a jab at a distance where you land at full reach? You're popping the jab at a distance where you have to land the straight punches before full reach. Because if you're your closing distance fast, whether you're moving the fastest or your opponent's closing it the fastest, you guys are both engaging, making this happen once you're in the pocket like this. Right. So let's say you were to take that step forward from this distance where both of you can land straights, but it'd be before a full extension. You get closer by taking a step forward. It's going to be difficult to land your straights from here. There's a difference between landing before a full reach and still getting a good jab and throwing a straight here, but not being able to land because it's just too close. Can't land right. Can't generate the power in that short punch. Now, if you're Bruce Lee or if you're a student of Bruce Lee and you develop the little short straight punches, right? Maybe a 6-inch punch where you're saying, boot, from here to here, boot. I'll generate a lot of power. I'll generate enough power. That's in your arsenal. Read this range. Understand that if you're better at like if you have that in your arsenal, maybe that helps you take the upper hand on the opponent at this range because they're not going to be prepared for that. Maybe once you take this step, maybe you start here and you take that step forward and you're going to come with a straight. They're going to think, man, I don't even got to worry about that. Let me just throw the hook. I see his hand coming out. His jab ain't going to do nothing from there. Even if he puts that glove onto my face, it's not a good enough strike to hurt. Might be a push, but if I pop my hook out, right? So you got to kind of like understand how you're going to approach it, and then just expect what is possible, not possible, what is easier, what is more difficult for the opponent. But it's pretty hard to land straights here. So let's say you take that step forward and your opponent's like, without stepping forward, I'm jabbing. Your opponent's not stepping forward, but your opponent's going to pop out that straight punch. Your opponent's going to pop out that straight punch. It's going to be able to reach up to the blue line. So to make contact on the head, the punch has got to be real short. Your timing's right where you beat him to the punch, literally like you're stepping forward and putting your body at this distance. right before he decides to pop out the jab. So essentially, you're kind of like stuffing his punch, but then maybe you're confident with making that straight punch at a short range. I'm focusing mostly on straight punches because I'm talking about coming from a more distant range, closing the space, using your straight punch to take the upper hand, to extend at the longest reach possible. But studying your offense is going to be about how you set up combos, how you decide to strike. Here, hopefully, you understand I'm helping you decide when to strike, no matter what your offense is. You work on that and develop your strategy there. This is going to help you with timing. Timing is not always about speed, although speed helps. As a physical attribute, speed is going to help. But mentally, timing depends on being able to read this distance. It's a mental attribute. You being able to read these distances. Right. So what are we talking about? Coming in from long range to mid range, where you can make hand to hand contact and you can land at full reach. You can land before full reach and still be in mid range. No one's stepping. If you step, it starts to get difficult to land straight punches. In this example, it's the same exact distance where you were the only one stepping, except I just wanted to show you an example where you're not stepping, your opponent is stepping. So maybe your timing is about popping out your jab when they try to come in. So you know they might want a jab step. If they look something very, very interesting that I'm going to be able to show you. Well, look, something here on this frame is that you can see if you were to pop out the punch, like we said, without anyone stepping, you can land. But let's say you're trying to time your opponent. He can throw a jab step. He can throw the jab without stepping and still hit you. See this? Without moving, that blue glove bone can hit you. But what if they want to close in? It's going to be difficult for them to land a straight. So you're not really worried about the straight. If you see them coming in, you're not really worried about the straight. Your defense has to focus on defending mostly hooks and uppercuts. I see a lot of times they coming in, stepping in with a hook, right? That stepping hook, step forward, find the hook. Maybe you're popping out jabs and they're like, let me hook. Let me hook him. That glove comes out, I'm going to hook him. So your timing is about watching him come in, because without you moving towards him, he's coming in at this distance and you're going to jab him. Or maybe you're going to defend that jab step real fast. Maybe you're going to look for the hook to defend, right? Your defense has to be alert to what may come, but it's difficult to land the straight punches from here. At this point, once you're closing distance and you're at this point, even if you're not deciding to continue to close the distance, but you're prepared for whatever he's coming with, you got to know it's difficult to land the straight punches. You better be ready to pop that jab out before he gets his position at this distance, right? So if the foot comes up, boom, you pop him in the face, because without him moving forward, you can already pop him in the face. But the point is that at the moment where he's deciding to lift the foot up, that's less than a second, like a millisecond, where his foot comes up. Now he's standing on one foot. In a millisecond, he's on one foot only. You land it on the head, you land it on the body, or you just smack his glove. But maybe your timing game is like, let's get to mid-range and I dare you to come closer. Maybe you want to be the mid-range fighter who takes the upper hand at this distance. Then you get closer, right? You see them at this distance here. They get a little closer, and now we call this short range. If you're going to throw straight punches, you're going to have to land before full reach. Your arm's not going to be able to extend completely on straight punches if you're at this distance. The moment you enter short range, that is true. Without any steps forward, it gets difficult to land straight punches. At the most uh, at the most distance in short range, you can still make it happen, straight punches. But I mean, I'm talking about an inch closer, and now straight punches are no longer a good idea. It's going to be really difficult to make that effective. So popping out your glove and trying to extend your arm from here is mostly about control and dominance than it is about landing a good strike. From here, there's not really much that stepping forward will do for striking, more about just positioning. Your steps from here is mostly going to be about positioning and dominating. And this is the moment where uppercuts do become really dangerous. The uppercuts can probably be dangerous here, especially because a baby step, like a half step, not even like a real step forward, but these little baby shifts in feet can allow somebody, because a shift in the feet a little bit closer, plus the body leaning more towards the front leg, that's going to allow somebody to get a nice uppercut, a long uppercut, but it's going to allow them to get it from here. If there's some stepping forward going on, there can be some timing to land an uppercut at the mid range, for sure. But what I'm going to say about this tight, close range here, I mean, sometimes you'll see guys have their guard up, and it's like they might even start leaning on each other. Gloves are pegged against each other, and they're kind of leaning a little bit. In the sport, you're like not supposed to do that too much, but it's gonna happen because this is fighting. You're gonna look to control and dominate and be real physical with them. But from here, most of the time, the fight's about hooks and uppercuts, and it's easier to defend an uppercut from the mid range as a simple pullback, or just the gloves being right there is going to be good. Once you start to get closer, I mean, even from here, maybe the pullback still helps you dodge the uppercut. But once you get closer, I mean, even pulling back might not be enough to escape the uppercut if they're real good with that strike. Putting your gloves in front of it, although it's going to block it at that short distance, doing a nice, strong, short uppercut is going to still cause some type of effect, because your hands coming down to block that have to be a little more tense. You have to be a little more solid with that guard when you're defending that uppercut by putting your arms, gloves in the way. That means you're liable, because you get into that tense position, they're probably going to setting up a combo that it's the uppercut, and they're going to find other ways to get around the guard. It's a whole craft on its own to fight in the pocket. Some people specialize on this. Some people's game plan in the fight is, how do I get to this point so that I can execute with my strengths, execute on my game plan, my true offensive game plan, right? When it comes to the offense specifically, fighters, you can't forget about your offense. So you can be good with positioning and defense, but if you forget about offense, you're not going to get far in a career. So what we're talking about is some people build up their arsenal so that they can have the game plan of closing distance and fighting at short range. They're like, they know those are their strengths. This is what they're trying to do, even if they're throwing you off. A lot of times you'll have a pressure fighter, like you think of a lot of fighters who are pressure fighters that are coming forward. They're always moving forward. and they're turning up the offense big time. They're prepared to be in the short range. They're prepared to be in the short range, execute the combos that they feel like are going to be effective to hurt their opponent. But let's say that you know that is your opponent who is the pressure fighter, who has a lot in their arsenal to fight here in short range. You know that's their strengths. You know that they're probably stronger than you fighting in the short range. You don't have to comply. You don't have to do this. You don't have to stay in this short range. You need to learn how to control range. You need to develop your footwork so that this is muscle memory, so that it's becomes instinct. If your game plan is against this fighter to avoid the short range, then your training should get your legs and your feet to the point that when you are in this short range, you don't stay there long. You know how to backstep, you sidestep, you pivot, and then your defense can be prepared for what this guy might want to do when in short range. You can step into short range, but if your game plan is to not stay there long because he's stronger than you fighting there in the pocket, then you're stepping in to bait him, and your defense is prepared for whatever might come when you're stepping in there. He's going to get excited, and he's going to decide what he does next. He can be better than you at short range, but you being able to step in short range and step out of short range, using that as bait, being prepared to defend anything that he tries to do when you get into that position. I mean, this is going to be your ability to control the fight. I'm going to control when you get excited. I'm going to control when you turn up your offense. You might think that you're in control because that is your game plan to come pressure and fight. But I also have the ability to close distance. And I have the ability as well to open up space so that we extend the distance. There's a lot of value in learning how to fight at the short range. But for guys who are mostly focused on this because that is their main game plan, curious to know how good are they at fighting in these ranges. That's when you see guys who are dominating with the jab. They're better at fighting at the longer ranges where straight punches are the most effective strikes. So they're dominating with jabs because they're better at fighting at these ranges than their opponent, who's probably better at fighting at a short range. A guy who's really good at fighting at a short range is probably making their game plan to get in short range, right? If they make it obvious that that's what they're trying to do, and you have a great understanding of all this range, you should be able to control the fight. Some fighters, they will have the game plan that they're trying to get into short range because they know that that's where they're going to make the most damage, but they don't want to make it obvious that that's what they're doing. So they take their time. They take their time getting in there. So that means that they're going to spend time fighting in a long range or in a stepping range. During that time that they spend fighting in that, are they dominant? Maybe you're better at fighting in those longer ranges, so you're going to take the upper hand when you're in that range. How long can they be patient? Right? Because they're trying to be patient so that they don't expose themselves, right? So that they don't make mistakes, they don't get caught slipping. but their game plan is I need to get in short range, hurt you, and they're showing patience, trying to take their time. Right? They're acting like, all right, I'm reading you, I'm paying attention. Go ahead and read me all you want. I'm reading you too. They're going to try to find out ways to expose you so that then once they get into that short range, they know exactly what to do and they land what they need to land. But how? But if they're not really dominating while they're being patient, and you're able to dominate during that little period, maybe sometimes you watch these championship fights and it's like rounds and rounds of a pressure fighter not applying that much pressure. You know what happens? A feeling is brewing up, a feeling of impatience. Now, intentionally, they're like, I need to be patient, but they can't help. They can't help but to accumulate impatience because their mind is on dominating in the pocket, coming into short range so that they can land the combos, throw the combos they need. You're going to be prepared. You should be prepared. You be prepared for when they do that. You defend and then get right back out. Oh, you're going to have to come chase me then. And they'll use their energy to do that. That's what they do. It's called a pressure fighter. Ultimately, my opinion is to not box yourself in. If you telling yourself you might have those tendencies to be the pressure fighter, that's maybe your game plan a lot of times. But when you box yourself in as the pressure fighter, you accumulate impatience a lot quicker. If you tell yourself, hey, I'm really good at applying pressure, really good at coming in short range, I'm typically better at fighting in a short range than my opponents. Cool. Those are called strengths. It doesn't define everything about you as a fighter because you're good at fighting at short range, but you can also improve the way you fight at long range as a way to help your overall game plan so that when you are fighting in the long range, you're not getting dominated. If you're not getting dominated and you're the actually one dominating at moments, right? It might be a little even. Sometimes your opponent's dominating at a long range and you're like, fine, you're dominating. Sometimes you're like, oh, now I'm dominating at a long range. I don't got to go in short range. I can dominate from here. That's going to help you stay patient. The impatient starts to build up heavy when you're getting dominated and when you feel like you're losing rounds or when you're getting hurt at the long range. Before even being able to get your offense off, really, it's like I'm getting dominated. I'm not even trying to come in. I'm not getting caught slipping coming in. I'm getting caught slipping on the outside. That's going to make your impatience grow really fast. Once it gets heavy enough, that feeling is heavy enough, I don't know how to describe it. You see blood, you're like, fuck that, I'm coming in. You become less intentional is the main problem that I'm trying to point out. So hopefully this stuff is helpful. All in all, you take these concepts, you apply it into your program, you still work on what you're working on, offense, defense. It's not supposed to change any of that, but you might adapt a little bit of how you train on offense and defense based on now having a better understanding, having more of a mental attribute when it comes to range. Let me know what else you would like to discuss when it comes to range.